An elderly beggar woman felt extremely cold, and along with her pets, she devised a plan to capture the attention of the authorities. Cecilia was a destitute elderly woman who had only two beautiful stray dogs for company, which she had rescued during her countless walks along the chilly streets of her city. Lacking friends and surrounded by a world that treated the homeless with indifference, Cecilia gradually learned to rely solely on her dogs for happiness. However, one day, an unexpected twist of fate brought her story to light, capturing the attention of the entire nation and finally giving her the recognition she deserved. Cecilia was born into a wealthy family. Her parents had money and moved in the most important social circles of her city. Her personal life, however, was a disaster. Both were unfaithful to each other while suffering from a series of addictions to all kinds of drugs. So when Cecilia was born, her future did not look promising, for despite the material opulence of that home, family warmth, the most important thing for the growth of a child, was absent in that house. But the worst was yet to come. As the months passed, Cecilia's parents began to notice that something strange was happening with their daughter. The little girl did not seem to be developing at the same rate as the other babies. Their fears seemed to be confirmed when the little girl reached the age when all children began to say their first words, and Cecilia did not make a sound. Although her parents were not exactly responsible for her fast-paced and chaotic life, that fact worried them, and they took their daughter to the pediatrician. The doctor confirmed the news that they did not want to hear. Cecilia suffered from a very strange infantile disorder that delayed her development. Although with the right treatment and therapies, the little girl could lead a normal life, the parents were very worried when they heard that diagnosis, not so much because of the love they had for their daughter, but because they were so superficial. For them, it was a source of embarrassment to have a daughter with such issues. So they decided to start the treatment proposed by the pediatrician as soon as possible to make their Cecilia grow normally. However, things did not turn out as they had imagined. Accustomed to solving all their problems with money, the couple believed that their daughter's health was also a purely economic matter. They thought that it was enough to pay huge sums into the bank accounts of the best specialists to buy Cecilia's proper growth, as if she were just another commodity. They could not have been further from the truth. The doctors and psychologists who treated the child all insisted that for the treatment to be effective, it had to include, in addition to professional counseling, the continuous personal and loving support of the patient's parents. Otherwise, everything could be useless, and indeed, it was. Obscured by their world of daytime business and nighttime excesses, those parents did not give their daughter the time and attention she needed. After a long period of treatment, Cecilia turned 6 years old and still could not speak. Feeling cheated, the little girl's parents decided to terminate any kind of professional sessions and simply assumed that their daughter was mentally impaired. Furious, as if the little girl were to blame, they retaliated by removing all support from her. They allowed her to continue living with them, but made her feel bad every day of her life. They never sent her to school and always treated her as an outsider. Thus, Cecilia was adding to her birth problem other limitations acquired from that treatment. She grew up without friends, not knowing what it was like to interact with children her own age, not knowing how to read or write, and getting an idea of what the world was like only through what she could see on television. When she turned 15, Cecilia not only lacked the tools to function in society, but she was also left without what had until then been her only support: her parents' money. In the midst of their excesses, they committed a series of mistakes that led them to bankruptcy. By the time Cecilia was 20 years old, her mother had died of an overdose, and her father had abandoned her to her fate. Unable to speak, and with no one to turn to, it didn't take long for creditors to claim the property in which the young woman had been abandoned, and she was now thrown out onto the street. Her survival instinct led her to reach out as her only means of subsistence. The coins she began to collect were quite scarce, but with them and some signs, she managed to make herself understood in order to exchange them for some food. That was Cecilia's new life, living on the street and begging to survive. As time went by, the harshness of that world did what therapies with the best professionals in the field could not. Cecilia began to speak. The woman had learned to articulate a series of sounds that, while falling short of normal communication, greatly facilitated her ability to make herself understood. It was an anonymous victory that interested no one else in the world, but one for which she felt deeply proud of herself. Beyond these sounds, however, Cecilia remained the same as ever, unable to read or write, deeply emotionally scared, and without a trade with which to earn a living. Days continued to pass into years, and years into decades. The only thing she did differently was adopt 2 dogs she found on the street, which she tried to feed with her already meager food in exchange for some companionship. Cecilia was 59 years old when the event occurred that would trigger a series of coincidences that would eventually make her famous. The national government enacted a law prohibiting citizens from sleeping on the street. It was an exclusionary measure because it provided no alternatives for people like Cecilia, who had no place to sleep. The measure provoked protests throughout the country, but the government did not back down and began to capture street dwellers and persecute them as if they were criminals. Fleeing the cold that plagued the city and the persecution of street dwellers, Cecilia came up with a plan to save herself and her pets. She got some large garbage bags and wrapped herself in them so that, over the course of the night, anyone who saw her would mistake her for a pile of garbage. Although the plan seemed perfect, it didn't work out as she thought it would. One morning, a police patrol cruising the city streets stopped at the suspicious moving bag, and upon searching it, they found Cecilia and her pets. But what seemed to be the end of her happiness actually became the beginning of new blessings for the woman. Within the police force, there were also those who disagreed with the move to prosecute street dwellers as criminals, and the authorities who found Cecilia were part of this dissent. Seeing that the poor woman was resorting to such a desperate measure, they not only released her, but also took photographs of her situation and immediately sent them to the press, which soon covered the story, including the heroic disobedience of those policemen. The reports of the case spread across the country, igniting a wave of outrage against the government. This public outcry not only resulted in the repeal of the unconstitutional law targeting street dwellers, but also prompted a desperate attempt by the authorities to restore their image. As a result, Cecilia received the medical care she required. She and her pets were relocated to a home for disabled adults, where she now receives daily treatment to help her communicate effectively and enjoys a happy life with her 2 beloved dogs. Dear viewers, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this incident. Please share your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for your support.